Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of The Democratic View. I'm the hostess. My name is Phyllis Italiano, and I have with me a gentleman whose column I read every single week in the press, East Hampton Press, and actually it's also in the Southampton Press as well. And his name is Carl Grossman. And I'm so happy to finally get you here because I have admired you and all of the things that you always write about for so very long.
Thank you so much, Phyllis.
Yeah. So I always like to know something about the people who I interview and how they get into what it is they do. And we know what you do. You write, and you write as an advocate and an investigator. So how did that all happen? Where were you born? Where were you raised?
Well, I come from Queens, Brooklyn. But in terms of journalism, what led me to what I've done for like 50 years, would you believe, had to do with college. I decided I was going to go and see America, so I went to Antioch College in Ohio.
Yes, I know it.
And they have a work-study program where you go to school for a few months and then they have you on some job for a couple of months, go back to school, back and forth. And I selected an internship, basically, in Cleveland at the Cleveland Press. Now, this is a very corny story. I'm also a professor of journalism, have been for now 35 years at the State University of New York College at Old Westbury. And I tell my students the story, and I apologize, it's corny, but it has a lot to do with what I've done. Above the entrance to the Cleveland Press it was engraved in the granite, "Give light and people will find their own way." And there was like a lighthouse next to those words.
I think that's terrific.
Well, I not only were the words, kind of terrific, but beyond the words, there was a bunch of reporters at the Cleveland Press. This is way back. This is 1960. They weren't called investigative reporters then. That term comes in about 10 years later, late 60s, early 70s. They were no longer called muckrakers. There was this period of so-called muckraking era in the United States 100 years ago. But what they did was muckraking, or what's known now as investigative reporting. And I was just a copy boy. And particularly when I'd work at night at the Cleveland Press, all but alone in the city room, you get calls from people, some announcing some press conference in Shaker Heights, and you wrote a little memo to the suburban desk, or something happening in the city of Cleveland, you wrote a little memo to the city desk. And then sometimes a lot, you got calls from people with terrible horror stories, all kinds of awful things happening or have happened to them. And you wrote a memo that would go to these investigative reporters. And they'd go out and try to document these stories of inequity, injustice, danger. And the paper was just loaded every week with exposés done by these investigative reporters. And to me, what was absolutely amazing was that half the time, once the expose was published, the problem was resolved. It was solved. I mean, the power of the press, when it exposed these inequities, these injustices, these dangers, that was enough to resolve the problem. And I just thought that was the neatest thing. I mean, it was give light, and in fact, the people would find their own way, would demand some sort of change. People in politics, people in government would follow along. But what a neat thing. So I came back. I didn't stay at school. I went back to where I'm from New York, and I aimed to become an investigative reporter. And my first big story, in fact, I know you're familiar with this story.
Oh, am I ever.
First big story, this is 1962, and I got a job at the Babylon Town Leader in Suffolk County. I mean, I came back here east to Eastern Long Island because my girlfriend from Antioch was from Centerport in Huntington. and we got married very early, like at 19. And here I am on Long Island. And my first big story was to go to Fire Island, where you spent many a summer, because Robert Moses, the master builder, some would call him, I would call him other things. I mean, I found him a kind of a wacky kind of character.
Oh, God.
He was this public works czar of New York State, and he wanted to build, he just announced this plan when I showed up at work at the Babylon Leader, a scheme to build a 4-lane highway down the 35-mile length of Fire Island, which he claimed would anchor the beach, And that weekend, I recall, first week on the job, I went to Fire Island. I was very fortunate. I ran into people who were very articulate, Charles Collingwood,
Well,
the famed reporter, Reginald Rose,
yes,
the famed author, and others. And
exactly.
they explained to me that this road would devastate Fire Island. In fact, it would be wider than Fire Island at certain points. Like
Where I go or went for 35 years in Lonelyville,
Yeah.
it would have taken the entire width of Lonelyville. And one of the things that I was involved with was a clam bake. We got together in Fair Harbor, a whole group of people, and we organized a clam bake on the beach, and we brought out politicians to hear what we had to say. And as a matter of fact, Mayor Koch, before he was Mayor Koch, Ed Koch was one of the people. And we got everybody that we possibly could come to organize and to get behind this ludicrous, crazy, hilarious, I mean, I laugh now, that anybody would have even proposed this kind of thing. He had one bridge over there and one bridge on the other end, east and west, and he wanted to connect them, and sacrificing the entire island.
I remember taking that day a walk through Sunken Forest.
That's right, beautiful
And I'm
place.
not from the city, but I know a touch about nature, even though I'm from the city. Well, I was an Eagle Scout, for example, and we used to hike and camp and all that. And I had an appreciation of nature. And I mean, this magical forest would have
Yes.
been just paved over by this road. So in any case, I did a big story for the Babylon Leader, very big story, and that actually helped spark the Murray Barbash, who you know too.
Oh, dear old Murray, yes.
Great
He was a
conservationist.
leader, and,
But he called me, I remember when the story came out, saying, we're going to do something. And in fact, Murray and his brother-in-law, Irv Like, who was an
who's now
attorney.
involved in a very important case here in East Hampton.
Yeah, well, he's fighting these power lines that
Yes,
are
he is indeed.
65 feet high, and they're using toxic pesticides on the bottom of these poles that they're shoving in. I mean, Irv Like is the attorney. Well, there's two excellent attorneys. Professor Friedman is the other, challenging PSEG in this, talking about crazy things,
Yes.
in this placement of these high transmission lines through a residential strip from East Hampton Village to Amagansett. In any case, what they do, this is back then, and I hope folks here in East Hampton and Amagansett have the same good fortune as the folks back then. What occurred was that Murray and Irv and others were involved. Robert Cushman Murphy, the famed ornithologist from the American Museum of History, he was involved in this committee that was created, which was called the Citizens Committee for Fire Island National Seashore.
I remember it.
And they went in that direction because it was clear that you couldn't stop Moses on the state level. You had to use federal power. And I remember, this is about a year and a half later, and this was so important because most politicians, I mean, save Ed Koch, but most politicians were under Moses's thumb. Most of the media, I mean, the New York Times, Newsday, the paper I finally went to, the Long Island Press, They were cheerleading for this highway, but Stuart Udall, who was the Interior Secretary, came to Fire Island, and I recall the day. And even though the notion of a national seashore was new, and this would be a small national seashore, he appreciated the importance of a Fire Island national seashore. Back a number of years ago, out in New Mexico, I met up with Stuart Udall again. This is decades later, and we talked about what happened then. In any case, Stuart Udall supported the notion of a Fire Island national seashore. It happened. There was no Moses Road. And again, I learned that lesson that I kind of had picked up as a kid at the Cleveland Press. Give people the light, and they'll find their own way. Explain that the road would not anchor the beach. I mean, you look what happened on Jones Beach as a result of Superstorm Sandy. The Ocean Parkway, which is similar to what Moses wanted to plop down on Fire Island, was just devastated by
I
that
used to
storm.
take that road all the time.
Well, what we also found out in our investigation of the would-be Moses Road, that in fact what Moses had been doing, this is through the Jones Beach State Parkway Authority for years, was getting bulldozers to work at night to push sand alongside that Ocean Parkway to keep it in place. A road would not anchor the beach. In fact, what you have to do with barrier beaches, and the whole science of coastal dynamics was new at the time, but I mean, Dr. Orrin Pilkey and others have since elaborated on how actually barrier beaches have to remain flexible, have to shift with nature, not suit real estate interests. So a great victory. And just an addendum. 20 years later, Murray and Irv were right in the middle of the fight against the Shoreham nuclear plant. And this was a big, as a journalist, I'm now with the Long Island Press. And later the Long Island Press ceases publication after 150 years. And I syndicate the column that I had at the Long Island Press to weeklies, including the Southampton Press and
East Hampton Press.
well, the East Hampton Press wasn't around then. It was the East Hampton Star, a bunch of long list of newspapers, and Shoreham, this nuclear plant that in fact Lilco built, completed in Shoreham on the North Shore, was a big target of mine. And Shoreham, importantly, was not just Shoreham. Shoreham was to be the first of 7 to 11 nuclear power plants that Lilco planned to build on Long Island.
Oh my God.
Well, Long Island was to be
Oh my
turned-
God, I didn't know that,
Okay, yeah,
Carl.
Long Island, in the parlance of the time, was to be turned into a nuclear park and to generate nuclear-powered electricity for the whole northeast megalopolis. At the Shoreham site, there were to be 3 more, Shoreham 2, Shoreham 3. At Jamesport, which is just across the...
I know Jamesport very well. That's where I first went to.
Well, 4 nuclear plants were sited for... In fact, if you go down Sound Avenue now, as you pass what was to be the Jamesport nuclear plant site, you'll see a big meteorological tower, hundreds of feet in the air.
I've seen it.
That was built, that tower. They've never taken it down to get baseline readings on wind direction and stuff, meteorological readings, just to prepare for if you had an accident. What is the, prevailing wind and so forth. That's still, it's a park now. That Jamesport site, thank heavens, is a state park, but it was to be, in any case, back to Murray and Irv, and their absolute brilliance. They flipped the Fire Island strategy when it came to Shoreham and these other nuclear plants. They figured that you're not going to be able to stop the federal government. The Atomic Energy Commission, which was succeeded by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, because of the AEC being so pro-nuclear. Well, the NRC has been, continues to be so pro-nuclear too. I mean, the AEC and the NRC never denied a construction or operating license for any nuclear power plant anywhere, anytime in the U.S. So they were just going to rubber stamp. a license for Shoreham. There was no stopping the federal government. So how can you prevent Shoreham and then ultimately all these nuclear plants from happening? What Irv and Murray figured, well, flip the strategy. Can't stop them on the federal level, we'll stop them on the state level. So Irv, who was the co-author of the New York State Environmental Bill of Rights, which is part of the state constitution, he also authored the Suffolk County Environmental Bill of Rights. He co-authored the Long Island Power Act, which created the Long Island Power Authority. And the authority of the power authority was based on the notion of eminent domain. The government has this power, it goes back to kings and queens,
Right.
of being able to take property. If, for example, they want to widen a road and the folks won't want to sell along the proposed right-of-way of a highway, the government has the power of eminent domain. And though the federal government, when the nuclear juggernaut first got going, back we're talking in the 1950s, precluded state and local governments from, preempted them was the word, from getting involved in the licensing of nuclear power plants on the basis of radiation, on the basis of all sorts of things. They were not able to take away eminent domain. And so what essentially the Long Island Power Act says is that if we're going to create the Long Island Power Authority, and if the Long Island Lighting Company wants to persist in its nuclear program on the basis of eminent domain, we're going to eliminate the Long Island Lighting Company. And the Long Island Lighting Company got very scared, and even though the chief executive officer, chairman, president of the Long Island Lighting Company was a real pro-nuclear guy, Bill Catacasinos. I mean, he had been the assistant director at Brookhaven National Laboratory, which worked hand in hand with Lilko on this nuclear scheme. B&L, Brookhaven Lab, was set up in 1947, to develop uses of nuclear technology beyond atomic bombs, also to do atomic research. But a main focus was developing nuclear power plants, working on food irradiation, doing all sorts of things nuclear. So even though Catacasinos came from that, how could you describe it? This nuclear brotherhood. In fact, I've heard scientists at Brookhaven Lab describe themselves as nookies, like Moonies. Even though Catacasinos came from this atomic culture, he realized that because of what Irv constructed legally, that would be the end of his company, the Long Island Lighting Company, the company he went to after Brookhaven Lab. And so Lilko gave up Shoreham, even though it was completed. They went through low power testing at Shoreham. I did a book on this called Power Crazy, because of Grove Press published it, because again, it was like a power crazy scheme, all these nuclear plants. And in the book, besides spending pages on whistleblowers who worked at Shoreham, one fellow, Ron Stanchfeld, who lived here in East Hampton, and he had worked on 6 nuclear plant projects. He said he had never seen a nuclear plant like Shoreham, and if anybody ever pressed that button and have that plant really operate, there would be disaster. And in fact, there was low power testing at Shoreham, and there were accidents. In any case, Shoreham was stopped. Jamesport is now a state park. Later on, the reactors at Brookhaven Lab, there were 2 of them, poisoning the groundwater with radioactive material, particularly tritium, were closed down. I mean, Long Island is now, this is the happy end of this story, a nuclear-free island.
Because did anybody ever think that, well, if there was an accident, how would the people get away from it? What would we do? Jump in the ocean and swim? Or jump in the sound and swim? You can't get everybody off the island.
Actually, one of the few politicians who was pro-nuclear during this fight was Joe Caputo, who was for a while presiding officer of the Suffolk County Legislature. And Joe used to, believe it, believe me, say that, well, if it's in the winter and the Long Island Sound is frozen, we could ice skate to Connecticut. I mean, I don't, I mean, unbelievable. No, the issue of evacuation of Long Island in the event of a major accident at Shoreham, which is just, 60 miles from Manhattan. It's right in the middle of Long Island.
Right.
In terms of the East End, I got the information and broke the story about how Lilco had this plan to blockade the eastern terminus of the Long Island Expressway with its trucks and stuff. So if anybody from East Hampton or Southampton or Riverhead, Southold and so forth wanted to escape to the west, because where else are we going to escape to? We're not going to be able to go too far off Montauk or Orient Point. They'd be blocked, because Lilco took the position, no, we could have evacuation if, we can control the. It was a fairy tale. It was ridiculous, and that was a major tool used to stop Shoreham for a number of years. The inability of evacuation in the aftermath of a catastrophic act like Fukushima,
Yes.
or Chernobyl and so forth. But in the end, what killed Shoreham was Irv Likes and Murray Borbash's brilliant strategy of using eminent domain to threaten Lilco's very existence.
I saw him recently at the meeting to the Save East Hampton type of thing. It was he was organizing with a group to bring this lawsuit about, and they have a new name for that group. But and I went over to him and I said, "Yeah, how's your wife?" I used to swim with her, And I'm sorry I didn't give him a big kiss for what he's done, because he's done a lot for Long Island, and I don't think most people even heard of him before, especially out here in East Hampton. Now tell me, why did, when LIPA was originally conceived and orchestrated, it was supposed to have elected trustees? What happened to that?
Well, the model for LIPA was out in California. There's something called the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, SMUD, and it has elected trustees, and the folks of that area of California, this is, in and around the state capital, it's about the same population as we have here in Suffolk County, over 1 million people. They are able to, through SMUD, chart their energy future. And in fact, there had been a nuclear plant out there too, which has been shut down. And if you go on the SMUD website, just Google and go right to the SMUD website, you can see that the remnants of that nuclear plant are now surrounded by solar panels, and they've gone safe, clean, renewable energy. And it's been done democratically. That was the way Long Island Power Authority was supposed to be. But what occurred, and this is terrible, is that the governor at the time, Mario Cuomo, decided we're not going to have an elected board of the Long Island Power Authority. The governor would appoint most of the members, and then the Speaker of the State Assembly would appoint others, and the State Senate Majority Leader would appoint others. In other words, the politicians from Albany, often called 3 men in a room, because that's the way it works in Albany, the governor, Assembly Speaker, Senate Majority Leader, kind of in the end make the major decisions. It is not a fountainhead of democracy up there in Albany. So they corrupted the nature of LIPA from the get-go. Then Pataki, it was a bipartisan killing of what LIPA was supposed to be. George Pataki, a Republican, made this permanent. And then only in recent times, Andrew Cuomo, Mario Cuomo's son, he all but decimated LIPA. LIPA is now just a shell.
I know.
And he brought in this company which is the company that is doing these polls, PSE&G, which is this company in New Jersey, which runs a bunch of nuclear plants, incidentally. This is not a green utility by any means. In any case, Andrew Cuomo brought in PSE&G to become the utility on Long Island. And I think that's a terrible thing. Now we have this private profit-making We could have a new Lilco.
And I think he's going to suffer because of it, because I don't think there's a person on Long Island that will ever vote for him. I know I'm not.
If we had a choice, I mean, the problem too is the Republican Estorino, who was the Westchester County executive. He's avidly pro-nuclear. At least Andrew Cuomo wants to shut the Indian Point nuclear plants. They're just 24
Yes.
miles above the Bronx line. And Andrew Cuomo has been in the forefront because of the dangers of these old plants, 40 years old.
I know that one is a terrible danger.
Oh, they're disasters waiting to happen. But Astorino, Rob Astorino, he is for, not only is he for Indian Point to go on and on forever, but he wants to have more nuclear plants built in New York State. So we have a problematic choice in November between Cuomo and Astorino. I don't think we want Astorino as a replacement for Cuomo. On the other hand, because on many levels, Andrew Cuomo has been an excellent governor, but on the issue of Long Island Power and who's to provide it, I mean, it wasn't just the vision of LIPA to function democratically, but also to focus on, like SMUD does, on having Long Island power generated through safe, clean, renewable sources, energy we can live with. I mean, now East Hampton, just a few weeks ago,
Yes.
has committed itself to
Indeed.
to 100% renewable
Right.
energy
Indeed.
in just like 6 years.
That's right.
And all of Long Island could do this, but I don't think PSE&G is into that kind of, I mean, PSE&G, like any
Well,
private
I think what they're
corporation.
trying to do is to go around them and make them irrelevant. And
Yes.
Carl, I hardly got a chance to even say anything to you because it was so important, everything you had to say. But thank you so much for coming. I do
pleasure,
appreciate it.
Phyllis. Pleasure.
And you must come back.
Anytime.
I really mean it.
Anytime.
Because I didn't get to talk to you about the thing I wanted to talk to you about.